have the part of the object that's the main object of creation, and you have the part of the user interface, but you have to have instant variables that only you access. You can then divide up the two different projects and combine it together. Apple themselves use this technique by having a public interface.h file and then a private category for calls that only they allow to use. So this is a very useful thing for managing multiple projects. Then we zoomed in. This is an extension to the sample spec object that has an instance variable in the category. Yes?
So, Objective-C still uses like OOPS concepts, right? Is it
Sorry?
object-oriented?
No, it's very much object-oriented. This is all how for accessing objects. These are all variables that are in each specific object. They're not global, variable, or class calls or anything. They still have other ways of doing it for that. But every object has an instance of this variable inside. You cannot extend instances, though, of named categories. And I doubt you ever will. Named categories is like saying I'm having a base NS object class, and every NS object in the world suddenly had 10 new instant variables associated. Your machine would break apart from memory leaks. There's no way to extend an existing class like the ones that Apple defines. But to extend your own classes is really useful. I'm not losing anything. I know this is a little technical more. Yes?
Could you specify which version of Objective-C and Xcode that this latest change?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good thing about this. You will have to use the new version of Xcode that just came out with WWDC. However, these changes, since they're in the code language itself, will run on older versions of the iOS. You have to look at the tech notes for that. So you can actually use this code, compile it, and then run it on the 4.0 version of iOS or 10.6. I believe it has to leave 10.6 Mac and it has to be 3.1 iOS, but you will have to look up the tech notes for that. Answer your question? That's the first major change, and for me that's the most important change that they announced a couple weeks ago. The second change is allocate, init, deallocate are now part of the language spec. That also includes naming conventions, the fact that new objects and a initting object should be named a certain way, and that factories should be named a different way, like string factories should be beginning with the word strings. This is all in the language. Now you think that's not important, except it's important for ARC. It's also important for you guys if you create code that follows these conventions, you better make sure you follow the conventions. They will break under ARC if you don't. So it's very important the alloc and init, dealloc are now part of the language specification. Third real simple call. Anyone ever get this bug? NSMutable Array, create an NSMutable set, allocate a init, and assign it. This will run because allocate an init returns an undefined object, and it gets set. This will give you a runtime error, not a compile error. Apple said, well, now that we know the language there, that is now a compile error. I personally hit this many, many, many times. Some people are nodding their heads, so this is kind of nice. Keywords have changed. Retain and assign have been renamed. This is going to be important for you because if you take the out of the box WWDC Xcode and run the sample programs or the template files, you will suddenly see these keywords and you will have no idea what they are. I didn't know. Strong is another name for retained. Unsafe, unretained, what a terrible name, is another name for assign. They have a new weak keyword, and they have one called auto-release. There's one keywords for both instance variables and properties. Basically, the properties are uppercase, the instance variables are underlined lowercase. The weak one's kind of cool. The weak one's black magic. You can assign an object to a variable, have it be weak. It does not change the retain count. When another object increments and decrements the retain count, the retain count ever goes to 0, this variable automatically sets it nil. That is phenomenal. That means you'll have to always check to see if the nil is before making the calls, but at least you won't have dangling references anymore. Now, that one specific feature requires iOS 5 and ARC. But even on non-iOS 5, you'll start seeing the keyword strong and unsafe and retrained, so pay attention. Anyone here use auto-release pools? I figured that. Congratulations. I've never used them, but they are useful. Auto-release pools was a real fancy way Apple had of saying, I'm going to create a whole bunch of objects. I want them all to be under-released, and I want to auto-release them all at once. for memory footprint. Apple did a hack. They said, we'll create an NS auto release object, do all the things you want to do, and then release it. It was a terrible implementation of doing something that's a wrapper. So they said, let's get rid of that, and instead we have this new command called auto release pull. And we'll put the commands inside, and when we're done, it does everything for you. Because it's not in the wrapper, it's considerably faster. Something on the order of 5 times faster than the old call. So if you start using a lot of auto release pulls, remember to use this one instead. Last change to the 2011 was called deploying to earlier releases. I hate that name. I call it weak linking. Any of us old Macintosh users from Cocoa days know what weak linking is. It means basically, if you don't have that object, you can say, hey, is that object there? If it's weak linked, it will automatically at runtime be linked in. If it's not there, it'll be nil, and your code can check to see if it's nil or not. This is our way of doing what we used to be called gestalt type of devices. You check to see, is this version of the address book support this call? This also works all the way back to 3.1. So weak link class references will always return nil. So you say, this class, is it here for me to use? Check to see, is it there? If it's nil, oh, we're not supposed to use it. By the way, this works all the way down to iOS 3.1 and Mac 10.6.8. There are some issues on 3.1. You should not reference an entire package. It's okay to reference classes of the package, but if the entire package is not there, read the tech notes. It finishes most of the major trainings other than ARC, so let me go over some trends I've been seeing. Do not expect Carbon garbage collection. Garbage collection was something that they tried on the Mac. Obviously, it's been a failure. Truthfully, garbage collection worked great, except it was really slow. You couldn't do any animation. I tried doing different things. I thought it was good. I was expecting it to be released on iOS. It's not going to be. So if you're on a Mac and doing garbage collection, your code's going to probably become obsolete soon. Get away from exceptions. Who here uses exceptions inside their codes? No one uses exception? Okay. Unfortunately, ARC really screws up your exceptions, because an exception can occur at any time, and the ARC is based on the idea of the code keeping intact, or if you retain, it will crash you. So start getting used to NS error style of checking. Learn about blocks. Blocks are already cool. I didn't go into blocks at all here, but blocks are very nice. But under ARC, you don't have to worry about retaining or copying the blocks. You just pass them around as if they're variables. ARC makes it much more easier. And finally, start enforcing name conventions now, because it's part of the code. Under ARC, how your code is handled in relationship to ARC is based on how your object is named. Yes?
Is there a runtime exception that the NS error?
Exceptions?
The NS error?
Oh no, NS error, that's a style of handling error where if in your code you've come across an error, you create an NS error object and you return it as a pointer to that NS error object in your parameter list. There are some calls that do that. It mostly has to do right now for disk I/O and file save and such. That's Apple's mechanism to handle exception handling. There is actually based on Objective-C an exception handling call. I've never used it. Java programmers do exceptions everywhere. The language is designed for that. Fortunately, it's not very popular at Apple. And that's most of my talk. Do I have any questions? I know this is more technical than most of our talks. I'm available. Give me a call, email if you have any questions. That is a .com at the end, not a .co.